Welcome back to Drive Your Thoughts podcast. I'm your host, Master Coach Carrie Marshall, and it's time to go after those goals.
Yeah, whether ready or not, life's coming hard, no breaks, no stop. And if you put me on the spot, don't get it twisted, I never drop. If you feel a bit out of control and out the box, here's a way that you could drive your thoughts. Turn this podcast on, it's a lock. Carrie Marshall on the clock.
Hey, what's up, everybody? So today it's like the most rainy day ever here in Utah. Our weather is insane. We have snow, we have rain. I think it's raining right now. So then all of the snow melts. And then like next week, there's like a huge snowstorm coming in. So that's just kind of what we're dealing with here. So today, what I want to talk to you about is I want to talk to you about your rivals, your nemesis, like your enemy that you just really don't get along with. And there's a reason that we're going to talk about this, but let me make it a little bit more personal for you. When I first started coaching, I went through a certification process through the Life Coach School. And when I did certification, we did this in-person event. And we were in this big group. So there's about, I can't remember, I think there were like 200 maybe. Somebody can look that up for me. But I think there were like 200 of us, maybe 150. And so we do the morning session, we do all together, learning the basics, all of that of coaching. And then in the afternoon session, we'd break out into these smaller groups. And so we'd break out in these groups of 10. And we had a master instructor and then like an intern that was helping us. And then we'd really get to kind of do, coaching ourselves and get feedback and all of these things. Well, I noticed that when I was there was this one woman in particular that I'm both what I was in awe of, and she also terrified me all at the same time. She was also certifying. And I remember thinking to myself, like, she's amazing. And she also scares the crap out of me. Because of just her coaching style is very different than my coaching style. But from the very first moment that I met her, I realized that like in this session that as we were doing certification, I was always kind of like judging myself against this woman. So I would do something and then I watch her do something and I'd be like, oh, like she did it better. I wonder why she did it better. So I was talking after we certified and all of this, I was talking to another person about this and they go, oh, so she's your rival. And I was like, not really. I don't think so. But it was interesting because I was like, no, we're all best friends and we all love each other and all of this. Well, then fast forward, her and I's actual coaching businesses, though they are very, very different, we have very, very similar timelines. Up to a certain point. Now, she knows who she is. She knows, I've told her this story before, but we start to kind of go along this timeline and we like get hired at the same place and we do this together. We do this together. Well, at a certain point, I kind of do start to see her as a rival because like she gets hired for something that I don't get hired for. And I'm like, oh gosh. And then I get to do something and she doesn't. And she's like, are you kidding me? And so I noticed that in my head, I start to create a rivalry. And I'm like, is she going to get it? Am I going to get it? Am I better? Is she better? And so I noticed that it's this back and forth. And so at a certain point, I noticed that it doesn't feel good. Like this rivalry doesn't feel good in my head because I go back to that very first time that I met her and I was in so much, like I was so inspired by her. And I noticed that the more the rivalry thought comes up, the more that I start to like be resentful. And so I really had to sit down and think about this like rivalry and what it meant to me. And I noticed that it wasn't being helpful. Now, here's the thing. We are really good friends, this woman and I. And so I kind of told her, I said, at a certain point, I started to almost see you as my rival. And she goes, oh, me too. And I go, I don't know if that's beneficial for you, but for me, I don't actually do really well when I think that I have a rival. What I do really well with is when I think that there are mentors and collaborators and all of these different things. That feels so much better to me because I'm so inspired by her coaching, how she coaches, by what she creates, by how she shows up for herself, her bravery, like all of these different things. So today, what I want to talk to you about is how you have rivals, nemesis, enemies in your life with different things. Now, this could be business related. It could be in your office. I once coached an entire sales team, and there were a lot of rivals in there, a ton of rivals that were going on, rivalries that were going on within the sales team. And like I said, for some people it was beneficial, but for other people it was actually hurting and hindering their progress with their sales goals. And so this could be somebody, like I said, in your life. It could be a sibling. I see this also happen where like two sisters will kind of love each other, but also be each other's worst enemies. So I want you to think about your enemy. And it could be, like I said, a coworker, a sister, maybe somebody in your business, maybe somebody that's actually going after the same goal as you. Like for instance, when I go up and do things with my kids' sports, of course there's going to be rival schools and things like that. So I want you to think for yourself about, is that rivalry helpful or does it hurt you? For most people, it's going to do both. And we're going to talk about both ends of this because I think it's important that we understand how we can actually use this type of energy, but then also when to pull back because it's not actually benefiting us. So let's first talk about when it's not benefiting us. How do we actually see that this type of energy of like being up against somebody isn't helping? Well, the first thing is when we get way too involved with what they're doing. So if you are always looking at somebody else, then that's never going to be beneficial because what you're doing is, once again, you're taking focus off of your own things and you're putting it onto somebody else. So really crazy fun fact about me, I went to culinary school. Shocking, right? Like I have been trained as a cook and a baker from my days in college. Listen, everybody, you never know what's going to happen after college. I think I worked maybe 2 days in the restaurant industry. It was not for me. That we're going to save for another day. But here's what I want to tell you about, because I brought this up for a reason. So I'm in culinary school and we go back and forth between cooking and baking. And so just depending on, at my school, there were lots of different groups, so we're sophomores and we had the freshmen and the juniors and the seniors with us. So our core group would bounce back from cooking to baking at different times. So we're in this baking section and we are doing cakes. I am not great I'm amazing at baking cakes, not great at decorating cakes. I've never really had a knack for it. Artistic wise, that's not my jam. But there was this other woman there who she went on to become this famous baker. And I love her. But when she was in school, she was like, oh, I've never done this before. So in my mind, she's like, I've never done this before. So I kind of play out, the playing field is exactly like it's supposed to be, right? Well, so we start to learn these techniques and I notice that she is so good. She has a steady hand. She knows the exact ratio of all of the icing to put on to make sure that it doesn't get crumbly. Everything about what she does is just looking amazing. Well, at first, when I started, because we're partners and we both have a cake and we're supposed to do it and then we're going to pass it off. And then as partners, we're going to build this amazing cake together for our next section. And so when I first start out, I am so focused on my own thing. I am dialed in. I'm doing a pretty good job. I'm doing exactly what my chef tells me to do. And I'm really paying attention to it. Okay. So when we get done with the very first step, I'm feeling pretty confident about what I've done. And then I look over at hers. Now, number one, I knew that she did it faster than me. But I really wanted to get mine amazing. So I was like, oh yeah, she's done, but mine's going to look better. But she was faster. It was better. It was more clean. It looked amazing. All of these things. And as soon as I saw that that was different, like I kind of started to get like antsy about it. So sometimes when we have rivalries, what happens is then we start to get so focused on other people's work. So I judge myself, I judge her, like she comes out on top. And so then the next thing that we're doing is some piping technique. And so we have these piping tips and all of these things. Well, we get the same piping tip, but I start to watch like how she's adding the stuff in the bag like that. Like, I'm like, what is she doing? Why is she doing it like that? I'm not following the instructions from my chef. I'm just like watching this person do it. And then she starts to pipe and I'm like watching her wrist movement. And I'm like, well, I've got to do that. I am not even paying attention to what I was doing. It goes from pretty decent and pretty good, like I passed, to a hot mess because I am like piping while I'm watching somebody else because I'm so involved with what she's doing. And I so want to beat her and what she's looking that I'm not focusing on myself. So let's come back to you and your rival. Do you ever notice that you're getting way too involved with what someone else is doing? This is a really good key indicator that this is not great energy. This is kind of bad energy to be coming, and you don't want to have a rival that's in that space, okay? The second thing that we do is we shut down. So one of my clients, we were talking about kind of like this other person and his space and his he's a coworker. And he's like, oh yeah, I really wanted to do this challenge that we were doing at work. But as soon as Cody said that he was doing it, I just decided not to do it. And I was like, why not? Like what? Oh, Cody always wins. Cody always wins. I hate competing with him. Like he's such a jerk. All of these things started coming up. Like he brags about it all the time. I'm like, okay, so you're just not going to do it at all? And he's like, yeah, no, I'm not going to. So that's the other energy that comes when we are doing these types of things with like a rival, is that we'll notice that we just shut down. We don't even show up to do anything. Cody shows up in our lives, the Cody in our lives, and we just shut down. So the reason that this is so important is because oftentimes when we kind of put ourselves up against somebody else, we find that a lot of times we're either way too involved with them or we shut down and we're not even seeing possibility in our lives. And so if you're coming and you have that rival coworker, you have your Cody in your life, and you notice that you're either way too involved in their work, right? Or think about my cake. I really wish I had a picture of it. I would post it on Instagram if I had a picture of it. And I would post her picture because it was gorgeous. I might look for it. I don't think I have one, but so you're either going to get way too involved or you're just going to tap out. Oh, you miss out on so much when you tap out of your life and you tap out of going head to head with somebody. So now let's kind of switch gears and talk about rivals that actually work. So you're always going to judge yourself against other people. It is an innate behavior that as humans we have. We are always going to judge ourselves against other people. But what do we do when we judge ourselves? Sometimes that rivalry is just within ourselves, but sometimes it's actually out in like the public where you have a rival with somebody and they have a rivalry with you. Sometimes what I want to offer is those people are going to be your best insight into your life. So I have a client that is a professional skier and he's in his 20s and he's been competing against this one kid since they were 14. So like almost a decade, not quite a decade, but he was talking to me about this kid and he's like, he knows every single one of my buttons and he pushes it. And he's like, when we're in kind of the big starting of the competition, he's like, I don't really pay attention to him because there's a lot of us and I don't really care. And he's like, but as we go through, we're always in the top 3, top 5. So he's like, so as the field gets smaller and smaller, I like focus on him. And he's like, and he'll say crap to me at the top of the hill and he knows what to say. He's like, he knows exactly. And he's like, and it changes. He's like, I don't know how, but he's like, it changes. He'll notice my mood and he'll say something. He'll notice that I missed something on a trick and he'll, say something about it. So when we were talking, I was like, okay, so tell me, what did he say at the last thing? Right? Tell me the exact last thing that he said. So he tells me, and I said, okay, I want you to visualize that instead of this kid saying that to you, it's your coach. because it had something specifically to do with, like, oh, you might want to get your ski up or twist. Or I can't remember what he said, but he's like, you might want to do this. And he was saying it in kind of like that teasing tone. But I said, okay, let's take that. And now what if your coach is telling you to do that? And my client said, he's right. I'm like, oh, interesting. Sometimes our rivals are our best insight, because he's spending so much time thinking and processing and like looking at you, right? This other skier is spending so much time watching my client that he actually does have some pretty good insight. And so he's like, oh yeah. I'm like, so sometimes when he says something, just like act like it's somebody else saying it to you. See what comes up for you. The other thing that I like to do is when somebody says something intentionally, right? The rival is like very intentional. I want you to just ask yourself what's true about it, because you'll find something. That's so important. And when we can do that and we can stop making it about the person itself, and we can just kind of interior, like, okay, like what is true? Now, sometimes people are just cruel. We have to actually make room for that and space for that as well. And understand that, like, if somebody says something really, really hurtful and mean and just downright cruel, you don't have to like take that on and like internalize it. You can be like, that's more about them than it is about me. But sometimes I want you to just think like, well, what if this is true? Like I said, like my clients, they're talking crap to each other back and forth. And so I said, okay, tell me something that he didn't say specifically about your skiing. Like, tell me something else. And he's like, oh, he told me that, I'm going to lose it and I'm a hot head and this and this. I said, okay, so what's true about that? And he found like 3 things that were true about it. So I want you to just really understand that sometimes those rivals can actually be beneficial for you. The other thing to really remind yourself of is it an internal rivalry like I might have had with my person, or is it actually something that's exterior? Because sometimes when it's just an internal rivalry, the other thing that you can do is you can really just tell yourself, like, why is it important that I have this person in my life? Because sometimes our biggest competition and the thing that inspires and motivates and drives us is having a rivalry. I love watching Formula One racing. And one of the things that in a Netflix special, one of them was talking about how he creates these rivalries in his head because it helps drive and push him. And he's like, off the track, we're like really good friends. So you have to kind of think to yourself, like, when is it maybe even beneficial for yourself to have rivalries? Now, I have someone that's really important in my life who's a very, very high producer, high achiever. And what he does is if you know him at all, you like think he's the most chill, like easygoing. He's kind of a little quiet guy, but internally he is always creating competition. And that's the other thing, is know the difference between a rivalry and a competition, because sometimes we can actually just lower it and create competition. And then you'll find yourself like, oh yeah, this isn't a big deal. It's just a really great competition. So this person in my life, he'll create these competitions and he is driven by them. He outproduces, outachieves all of these different people that didn't even know that they were in competition, but it's because of this internal dialogue. And he's like, yeah, I've already hit all of these different milestones in my own life. And he's like, I already know I'm a really high achiever. So he's like, so I have to create something. And he's like, so then I go and use other people's stats and other people's, things. And he's like, that really drives and motivates me. So I want you to know that just because you have rivalries, enemies, whatever you're going to call them in your life, it doesn't mean that that person or that relationship is toxic or bad or that you shouldn't be around them. Going back to that sales team, I had one of the guys on there that was like, I just have to leave. Like, it's not a healthy environment. I don't like this. And I was like, okay. I'm like, you can totally leave. But what if you looked at how people talk to you and what they said and all of these things in a different way? So we took those, those words and we kind of shifted them for him. And he started to out earn people because he started to take it internally and make it mean that, that it wasn't going to work. The Codys in his sales team were too hard on him, and he wasn't going to do anything, and he wasn't going to compete at all. So we just had to like really work on his mindset around it so that he could then see that really when he showed up and just made it more about pushing him to be the best that he could be, that's all that really mattered. So I want to know from you, where are you finding that rivalries are helpful and where are you finding that they're hurtful? Some of my best inspiration has come from when I get this feeling of competition in my life and I start to like really, really get into it. Like I said, I just know for myself where it goes from inspiration and collaboration and like mentorship to like rivalry. And I know for myself that when I get into the rivalry section, that energy is only fun for a little bit. I know personally for myself that rivalry is really a short-lived feeling that really turns to resentfulness really fast. So for me personally, I know that rivalry can come into my life for short amounts of time, but then it needs to come back to like collaboration and inspiration. Now for you, that might be different. You might love and thrive on rivalries. And so know for yourself, but then be okay with whatever that answer is. All right. I'll see you guys all next time on the podcast. Bye. Thanks for listening to this podcast episode. If you're ready to get in the driver's seat of your own life, you can come and follow me at Drive Your Thoughts Coaching on Instagram, or come and see more ways to work with me at driveyourthoughts.com.
Yeah, whether ready or not, life's coming hard, no breaks, no stop. And if you put me on the spot, don't get it twisted, I never drop. If you feel a bit out of control and out the box, here's a way that you could drive your thoughts. Turn this podcast on, it's a lock. Carrie Marshall on the clock.